Good afternoon. Welcome on the very last lecture within the Biological Thursday series this semester. And it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Jörg Müller. Jörg works in Bavarian Forest and at the same time at the University of Würzburg. And he has quite broad interest in ecology of birds, insects, forests, and he has several links to actually our ecological community because he has been collaborating on several issues concerning Šumava, bark beetle, disturbances in forests, how to manage national park in the kind of situation where we have this large-scale disturbances and so on. But his interests are, as I mentioned, much broader. He's interested in insect, population changes. He has published interesting stuff on insect decline, or actually lack of decline. And today he was originally intending to speak mostly about this insect decline, but since we attended his talk about the Šumava mountains and the changes in forests, which was amazing, it was 2 years ago, I kind of convinced him to speak about more broader issues, which ended in the situation when I don't know what will be actually the topic. So you will see the relatively enigmatic title, and I am myself curious what it will be about. So please go ahead.
David, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. It's a big honor to come to your group and to speak to this audience here. I try to mix up something which I have already presented in Brno and with some new results. And I would say it's something like my perspective on this hill, you know very well. You would call it Šumava Mountain, we call it Bavarian Forest, so the whole Bohemian ecosystem. I'm living there now. I'm not from there, I'm a Franconian, so I'm like a refugee there. But I get used to this spruce-dominated landscape with all the flavors. Sitting on the Lucen mountain, looking down on the Czech side and even on the German side, particularly to Bavaria, to winners, losers and ecosystem engineers, insects in the changing world. I would like to start a bit broader. I'm a bit proud that we got the title picture in Nature. So this is the last battle. If you publish something, okay, it's nice to get into Nature, but then to get the title page, and I'm a very bad photographer, but one of my friends, he's excellent in insect photos, and I asked him, I need something which shows insects and something about weather. And this makes everything more difficult, because normally you try to make a picture of a beetle without any water and so on. And finally, we made it with this nice cicada on the title page. What I want to show with this is that when I started in the national park, and the people were very much in lynx and red deer and stuff like that, and I came with the beetles. And the former head of the national park said, "What do you want with your boring beetles?" And it turned out beetles are not so bad, and I would show you later. And even in the broader society, insects still matters. So in this issue you have 5 papers on insects, insect declines, and insects in a changing world. Is it about pesticides, habitat loss, and climate change? Still a bunch of open question and pressing question for scientists, simply not answered yet. So probably you are all aware of this most influential paper by Kaspar Hallmann and colleagues with data from Germany, showing more than 75% decline over 27 years in insect biomass by malaise traps. And as an entomologist, I was also inspired by this paper, of course, as many others. So these are the data. So they put these malaise traps in small protected areas, and the real brain behind the data set is Martin Sorg. He's a surfeit guy, and surfeit guys love the malaise traps. So his motivation was never biomass, he was keen to collect surfeits. And interestingly, also myself was inspired by an old surfeit lady. She said, you have to put malaise traps in your forest, otherwise I would never have collected insect with malaise traps, because for saproxylic beetles, flight interception traps are much better. Okay, so this was the result they showed. This decline, note that this is a log scale, so the decline is much more dramatic than shown, but even if you look in more details, it's not so clear. You can always fit a straight line, but you haven't to do it. And the interesting thing in this paper, wait a moment, the interesting thing is the paper is crystal clear. They say, we see this decline, we did a lot of analysis, but we cannot explain it. And this is a nice starting point. So I was sitting in 2022 in the garden of my wife. She's doing this rocks garden with different flowers and so on. And end of May, and I was overwhelmed by more than 100 butterflies on 3 meters. I have never seen so many butterflies since 18 years in our garden. And this inspired me to think about, and I asked my PhD student, can you check our current malaise traps, the maximum values? And I put our current dots in this graph of this seasonal pattern. And in the beginning we were somewhere here, and here, and here, and then we were here. So our data showed more biomass in our malaise traps in Bavaria, not in the Bavarian forest, more than this Hallmann study ever had. And this was the moment that I said, okay, there must something affected by weather conditions and so on. So I asked my housekeeper, he's one of the best moth guys in Bavaria. He's collecting more than 50 years moths. And I asked him, what are the critical windows for an insect now in my malaise trap? Because all of you involved in entomology, you know that it's not just now the weather condition, it could be the year before when they lay eggs, it could be the overwintering, and this makes the story so difficult, this long life cycle. And even for humans, it's hard to catch up that. If I ask you, how was the last autumn? It's hard to answer for you, exactly. So, but you can measure that. And this is what we did. So we re-analyzed the Hallmann data with weather conditions, and this was done by a priori hypothesis. So this is not data mining. So just from my moth expert, he said this window, this window, this window, and then we grabbed exactly the data for every data point in the Hallmann set. So this is a wonderful data set. People often criticize the data, but I say they are wonderful because they tell you exactly the right location, and from this day to this day at this point in Germany. And then you can extract perfectly precipitation, anomalies of precipitation, temperature, and so on. And just with our a priori hypothesis, we found no significant trend anymore. Even if you see there is still some temporal pattern, no wonder, there are certainly windows we have overlooked. Of course, the world is even more complex than our few hypotheses. But then the most important thing was we took just these linear combination just from the weather condition and used totally independent validation data and found this very nice correlation. So this is an external validation, and people criticized me why the data were not from North Rhine-Westphalia or Brandenburg, and I said I would love to have data from the moon, from insect biomass, because this would mean that our model is generalizable even beyond the globe, but unfortunately on the moon there are no insects. So this is a stupid critique. But this is I say this is just something, I would say the whole conservation insect decline community has overlooked a trivial point, which is well known by all entomologists, but fully ignored, that weather and weather condition and weather anomalies can play a critical role. So even my point of view as an entomologist was, yes, there is some cycles, so good years, bad years, but we overlooked that there can be 10 bad years, which of course matters if then 10 years you have lower overall population of insects. And the first thing where I was inspired by that was an earlier paper where we did a well-stratified study across Bavaria in different landscapes and different local habitats. So we had local habitats, forests, meadows, arable field settlements, embedded in semi-natural, agricultural, dominated in urban landscapes. And the main finding what we could show is that we found less biomass in urban environments, but the same biomass in these harsh agriculture conditions and forests. So no difference in the biomass between semi-natural forests and arable fields. When I saw the first result, I thought there must be something wrong. But as we know today, this holds even in many other studies. So even our pesticides and intensive land use has even the tendency to increase insect biomass, but definitely not to reduce it, which is hard to accept even by entomologists, which have local data, and I say go out and measure it. But there are many data now out and published, all show the same pattern. So it seems that biomass is about productivity. On the other hand, we could show with metabarcoding data here that what we are, as entomologists, we know very well, the baddest environment for insect diversity are arable fields embedded in an agricultural landscape. So the main thing is forests are important for biodiversity and biomass is not biodiversity. The challenge is to measure diversity properly. And most people think this is a very simple thing. So, okay, abundance can be easily measured. Abundance or biomass, you can substitute. So both are two aspects. You can count insects, you can measure the biomass. This is something very similar. And this is the paper by my colleague Van Klink. He published already 2 years ago a very nice study on insect decline on abundance and biomass, and showed that there are negative trends. And this is just a repetition of his former science paper. Then he reanalyzed the data with species, and he showed there is still the number of observed species shows a decline. But this the use of richness is a misuse from a conceptual point of view, because this does not consider sample size. It's not corrected by the number of individuals or coverage based or whatever, which is in the mathematical, ecological community clear that you have to do that. Which means if you have a sample with 10 beetle individuals and another sample with 50 individuals, and you have more species in the 50 individuals, there is not a higher richness. You have just more individuals in most cases. And if you are a beetle or let's say moth collector, you know every night is different. Let's say you use light trapping. It's easy to catch in one night 100 individuals, in the next night just 20 at the same spot. And there's no difference, just the night was a bit different. And then he did correct for that in a proper way, based on the ideas of Alan Turing, the father of computational science, helping to kill all the German submarines. So he had a very good contribution to the Second World War, but even to biodiversity science. And what you see here, after correcting all these values, there is no trend in diversity. This means the big data set by Van Klink shows we see a decline in abundances, but in the bad years, they have just collected too few individuals to cover the diversity which is there. Not in their traps, but which is at the spot. So we tried to do the next step and develop together with N. Chao and colleagues a method how we can standardize sample coverage in sequencing data. If you have worked with metabarcoding, then you have the big challenge, they have no abundances. And the situation or abundances from metabarcoding is still an unsolved problem. In fact, it's not necessary, because we do not need abundance, we just need the coverage. So the sample, we want to standardize on the same coverage, that all the samples are on the same level. Which means even if you standardize by individuals, it's the wrong way, because if you have, let's say, a peat bog which is poor in species, and you collect there, a very simple example, 100 individuals, it might be you have collected almost all. Then you go to a rich meadow, you collect 100 individuals, and you have maybe 30% of the species there. This means the coverage is a totally different one. Therefore, we should standardize not by individuals, we should standardize our samples by coverage. And when we do that in the data with these methods, then we can show that still the local land use has 30%. You can calculate then along the hill numbers on rare species, on typical and dominant species, and this holds. This means the temporal decline observed by Van Klink vanished after standardization. The spatial decline we see in insects, that some habitats have lesser numbers, holds. And this is across 30,000 insect OTUs from 400 families. So it's a bunch of diversity from insects. Now let's go a bit more down to an area where we expect high habitat quality. Here is the Šumava National Park. It's exactly the ridge between Czech Republic and Bavaria. This is our national park. We have this core zone where you know that bark beetles and windstorms created a new wilderness. Not all people are happy. Then we had until recently the so-called development zone, where politicians and stakeholders on round tables developed a sophisticated method to help nature to be free in future. So by salvage logging, I show this to my students, how stupid things come out when you create round tables, because all those people on the round tables are already dead, but we as managers are still forced to do the things they decided. So it is not by scientists and not by experts, it's just a compromise by stakeholders. Be aware of such roundtables. I'm very skeptical about roundtables. I'm not a fan of it anymore. And then we have the famous buffer zone, which means, of course, there we do bark beetle management to protect private forests, even in the long run. And then we have the recreation zone with canopy trails. And there we concentrate the people. There you have a nice chance to see, even with your kids, the lynx, because our enclosure is a bit smaller. But of course they are all in enclosures. However, the agent with the license to kill is still active. So Ips typographus, now we had the boost of Ips typographus in the northern part. You have seen this former development zone. We designed it or designated it as a new core zone, and there was a huge amount of mature spruce. And within 2 years, he created a landscape like this. And this is our new boss. This is one of the leading experts in disturbance in Central Europe, Rupert Seidel from the TU Munich. So she's laughing, but she's not so happy about that. She's punished in the newspapers at the moment, and everyone says if she does in the right side, then they say it's wrong. In the left side, it's wrong. And even all the stories about positive things of disturbance are ignored. The interesting thing is, even in Czech Republic, the Ips typographus is the most serious pest insect in forests by economy. And we have a tradition in Germany and Czech Republic for more than 200 years of research on this insect, and we still do not know why they collapse. So we can model very well why they speed up, under which conditions, and there we try to bring together experts from, this is Mike Wingfield from South Africa, Diana Six from Montana State University, expert in interaction of fungi and bark beetles, Gregoire from Belgium, Rich Hofstetter, he wrote a big book about bark beetles in the world. He's working with the sound of the bark beetles and how they communicate and stuff like that. And this is Peter Biedermann, now professor for forest zoology in in Freiburg, and we created a workshop and wrote this paper, creating hypotheses, what are the mechanisms of the collapse. And if your young researchers are interested in entomology, go for the bark beetle. It's a still unsolved question. More easy is, if you have such an area, it's an older picture, is it an ecological desert? Because this was claimed by some forest manager professors, and this is something you can easily test. So we investigated plots with and without the bark beetle and come up with this very simple graph. And always, if you have a brown dot, then the bark beetle had a positive effect on biodiversity or on species observed, number of species. And you see only one group had a negative effect, and this were the wood fungi, which is on the first glance a bit weird. I will show you later why. I told people 10 years the wrong story because I had not the knowledge, and we came up with new results. It is the same for red listed. So in overall, it shows you the bark beetle boosts many of the species group. This was also shown then when we analyzed. It was a nice bachelor thesis by a student who is now himself a professor in Munich. So this is still his most cited paper from his bachelor thesis, which is very nice. So he analyzed closed, transition, and open habitats, and who prefers what. And you see in such, and it belongs even to your Shumava mountain. In your Shumava mountain, most of the species belong to this open habitat. They love it. The problem with all the studies I showed you now is these are well-known taxonomical group. We are able to identify, we have the key for identification and so on. But how about the dark taxa? The Diptera, all the flavor of Diptera. No one can determine them all by morphology, or the Microhymenoptera. It's also a wonderful group, all small, black and shiny, using bark beetle X. And so on. And this is what Mareike Kortmann did. She analyzed the same story, such a gradient in her thesis of bark beetle infestation with malaise traps. And then she analyzed for different groups, including these dark taxa. And the final thing was the number of dark taxa respond negative to tree dieback. This means we have overall half of them love the open, half of them love the dark forest. But in the dark forest, we have less knowledge on the species groups. So we are good in syrphids, as you know, which love the open, but we are not good in some dipterans like those living in fungi. Another question, which is very common in the discussion, then you have this open forest, now the species from the agricultural land are coming. So the typical open habitat species are invading in such a forest. It's unnatural and so on. And she just published this paper, and there you see, again, the gradient and the proportion of species where they origin. And these are the forest species, the light forest species, mixed, equally mixed, mainly open and open species. So this would be the open species, and you see along the gradient they are everywhere. So in simple, this means the forest knows these early phases of succession. The species are adapted to that. In the peat box, they have this all the time because they never regrow. And if the forest is open, our feeling is the forest is dead. But from the perspective of the species, it's not. This is more overall perspective on the story, a bit more spectacular and more simpler to tell the people is it when we come to single species. And in the world of mycologists, Androdiella citrinella is the famous fungus because it's the first fungus managed to be used by a president of a federal state. In Baden-Württemberg, when he designated a new national park, he said, we do those new national parks for species like Androdiella citrinella. And all the mycologists group were fully inspired and so happy because normally no one takes care on the fungi. And the reason was that we showed, Klaus Bessler, showed in this paper. So maybe you know the Bobin Urwald in the Shumawa Mountains. There and in our Mittelsteighütte, the Kubani in the Mittelsteighütte, the species survived and vanished from the whole production area. Then the bark beetle killed the trees and now it's everywhere. My personal famous story is Peltis grossa. This famous beetle, it's big like that, so it's a huge beetle and has very special exit holes, easy to recognize, very flat, very long. If you come to a trunk, it's easy to see. And it was recognized in 1905 behind my house on the Rachel, on the Bavarian Forest National Park. No new records. And it was a Czech colleague from Budweis illegally hunting Dragosoma depsarium in the Czech, from German side in the Shumawa mountain. I give not the name here, with my pheromone, and he sent me at night a message, no Dragosoma so far, but Peltis is common. And so I said, come on. And I went out to the forest, and after 10 minutes, I found in my own national park, really after 10 minutes, Peltis. And then I thought, now I have overlooked the species for the last 10, 15 years, because I already gave up the search. And we screened the whole area. So this was a citizen science approach. So we sent out families with kids at night with headlights, searching for 1 hour, 1 hectare, these and these structures. And then they reported. And you see always, this was the place I found it after 10 minutes. You see there close by is another spot and 2 other spots. That's it in my national park. You see in the Shumawa, there scarce records, but then, and this is where the Czech colleague found it at night, very common. These are 2 related species, and how we interpret the story is, these are all the old records, you see. It seems this rare saproxylic beetle survived in your country, close to the border between Austria and Germany in this triangle. It's far from our national park. So we had these in the 90s, we had a lot of dead wood here by bark beetle, but nothing here. And then something happened in the 2000s, in 2008, the bark beetle entered this area and created a resource pulse of habitat for this beetle. And if you are interested, go to the Drei Sessel. You can have a beer there. You can walk in the evening. You see, let's say, 100 in an evening, just from the trail, which is for a forest saproxylic beetle guy, it's unbelievable. And there what we learned is, and for dispersal, one of the most critical things is the source population. So this is all what I say now is just interpretation from the pattern. Our interpretation is they survived with a very small population here, but they were too small to spread. When the bark beetle increased the amount, the population increased, and then they spread. We also fitted a nice curve for the probability, and you see this was then the event. They sent out individuals. There are probably millions now from this species, and in this course they were able to colonize our national park again. So thanks to Czech Republic for your help. Otherwise we had to introduce it from Ural mountains. Another famous species is a bat, the Barbastel bat. Maybe you are aware of it. In Germany it's called the Mopsfledermaus because of this cute face. And this paper was published under the name, or one of the 2 papers, Beauty and the Beast, how the bark beetle, the beast, is helping an endangered bat. And this bat we could show, so we did telemetry and radio tracking and also LiDAR stuff, and checked how the favorite roosts look like, and we found out that the best is a bark beetle tree like these 2, surrounded by some living trees. If it is too open, maybe, this is also just speculation, maybe the microclimate is too harsh on the tree, so some semi-shade dead trees are the best, but for hunting they prefer the harsh bark beetle area. So the combination of bark beetle with roosts and open gaps are excellent, and now the species is very common in our park. Nevertheless, by politicians, by our law, we are forced to do salvage logging. This is a national park helping nature to do its own course. But this is not so uncommon. So we did a funny study across the world. We asked people in the whole, or we checked studies in the whole world and asked the people, where are disturbances? Are they protected? If you see this sign in the center, and then how much of the area is salvage logged, or they are not protected. And the first result was salvage logging is common in Europe and Asia. It's not common in US. And then we asked, what is the motivation? In unprotected production forest, the main motivation for salvage logging is timber, of course. Now we come to the protected areas. What is the most motivation for salvage logging? You might expect pest management. No, it's not. It's again timber. It's all about money, money, money. So be aware that a lot of motivation to remove dead trees is money. And even German money is used at the moment to build roads in the wilderness areas of Mongolia. There's the Khan-Kenti wilderness area north of Ulaanbaatar, one of the really most beautiful boreal wilderness areas, because the Mongolians were not used to use it because they are nomads. But and it is forbidden to extract the old larix trees, which have a high economic value. But they have a law, after disturbance it is allowed. And who is building the roads? German money is used to build the roads, and then the Russians and the Chinese are coming and extract the larix, where the flying squirrel is surviving, and so on and so on. So many stupid things are going on. But what is the response to salvage logging? And Simon did this in his PhD, Simon Thorne, meta-analysis over the globe. And in simple words, this is the gray curve shows these are the losers, these are the winners. So you see roughly half of the species group are winners by salvage logging. So some like the bare ground, the machine activities, even this creates habitats, and the other half are the losers. And now you might say, okay, if there are winners and losers, why not do salvage logging? The answer is very simple, because salvage logging is currently the default in the world. So we do normally salvage logging, and undisturbed disturbed areas without post-disturbance management are more rare than old growth forests nowadays. Because if you ask the society to cut down some old trees here in Prague or in an old forest, there is an outcry of by the people. If there is a disturbed forest and you say, let's clean up these dirty forests, people broadly agree, at least in Central Europe. I think the Czechs are a bit more relaxed than the Germans. In Germany, everything has to be really clean, even in the forest. So this helped us to study the effects on community assembly, because as we learned from Mark Cadot, it's not simply salvage logging. We had a resource pulse, and we did a removal experiment of the resource. And what we could show in this paper is that I just summarized the results. The thing is, if you have natural unmanaged conditions, then different communities reassemble in a different way. For example, fungi are very much competitive, so they often show over-dispersed communities. So they are locally more unequal or unrelated than you expected by chance. If we come to beetles, it's opposite. They are more clustered, habitat filtered. There's not so much competition. When we start to disturb this by logging, then we turn around the community assembly. And this is important for our national park, because we are proud that we protect natural processes, but often we do not understand them at all. The next question was then how much should be left of this salvage logging? If you are a protected area and the managers ask you, okay, I agree, this has a value, this untouched, disturbed forest, but how much is needed? And we tried different methods, and we found our boundaries in mathematicians. So Simon went to Enchao maybe you know the Chow index, or if you are in biodiversity studies, you know all these flavors of iNext packages in R. All this is the brain behind. And one of the major things behind is about singletons in your data. This is the reason why we have this picture here. So you estimate from the singletons and the doubletons and so on, your sample coverage and saturation and so on and so on. And so Simon and N developed a method for proportional rarefaction extrapolation curves, and after a weekend N came on Monday to the office and said, Simon, I solved your problem. It's so beautiful. And then she showed all the mathematical equations how to solve it. And then here they rerun the analysis on this global data set, and then fit the different curves, and you can then estimate, okay, if I leave 50% of the area unlocked, or then you get so and so many proportion of your species richness. Things like that, very practical, but based on a very complicated or challenging mathematical background. Nevertheless, we are sometimes forced, we cannot leave the trees unmanaged there, because there's a risk. We know from one dead spruce occupied by, or one occupied bark beetle or Ipstopographus spruce, you have about 3,000 to 7,000 individuals coming out, which are then able to attack other trees. And in the past, the national park was proud. You see, these are the years 2007 to 2011. Every year, the national park spent €1 million just to debark wood, which means you remove the bark, and then the conservationists had the feeling, wow, we did very great because the wood stays in the forest. If you are a deadwood ecologist, you say, ooh, I'm not so happy with these debarked trees, because this has nothing to do with the natural process. We all know that most things happen under the bark, in the phloem feeders, these are the nutritions and so on. And it was from the practitioners that they had an alternative idea, the so-called bark scratching, that you scratch the bark and make it unsuitable for the bark beetle, but still have bark on the tree. And then we said, okay, no problem, we go to our national park, wind flows are everywhere, and then we create a design to study that. Unfortunately, we learned again, God is doing wonderful things, but the design is normally horrible. So we were not able to find trees in a proper design, so we decided to pull them down by ourselves with a double cable car, which you see here. So it's very easy to drop down the spruce, it's just a few seconds, and this is what you see here. And then we had these, oh sorry, this is in German. We had three different treatments. This is the control treatment, the tree with the bark, then these scratched or gouged trees, and fully debarked. And when we studied different aspects of that, it's just a summary, there are 2 papers out of that. You see the pest control, so in the median is 400 individuals per square meter. It drops a lot down in the scratching, and even a bit more by this debarking, but there is no significant difference. The biodiversity of beetles is the same, scratched and controlled. The economy is even cheaper, and the public perception is better. So our tourists do not like the naked trees. It's too unnatural. And this is I learned from a person running one of the restaurants or a cabin in our national park. He said, "Oh, these naked trees are ugly, but you are doing better now." But this is more about management, but we also learned something. And this was published by Jonas Hage. So we investigated the fungi, and what we see is, so you expect for the fungi world, you expect the debark, the most horrible one. So we know from fruit body investigation, they have the lowest number of fungi species. Then we said, yeah, it's too dry and so on, it's not suitable. Then we did this meta-barcoding, by the way, with Peter Baldrian from the Academy of Science. He's our lab in all our experiments on fungi. And then we found this pattern, exactly the opposite. So the best diversity of fungi was found in the completely debarked. What happened? And then we checked for the processes, the proportion of deterministic processes, and we see more and more deterministic processes. And then we checked the rank of the species in the different treatments, and what we learned is basically the following. And this is well known now from fungi. We could show that on the global scale, and was also shown by Fukami in the Petri dish. Even if it comes to the function, fungi are so competitive that if you have suitable condition, the normal way is in dead wood, some strong decomposer arrive. And in our case, it's Fomitopsis pinicola. This is the dominant fungus, coming early, staying long, and doing the process of decay best. And everything you do to reduce these dominant species increases the diversity, reduces the decomposition. So normally we say higher diversity, the process is faster, better, whatever. Fungi are a nice example. It's not always the case. And this is exactly what you can see. So what we learned is inside the log you have more fungus species if you remove the main competitor in this community. However, in our national park, the lynx is just for the flavor. It's all about deadwood. The problem is, if you have deadwood under these natural conditions, then you have always different amounts. If you have high amounts, you have also high diversity of deadwood. So you have a huge trunk here, dry up roots here, and so on. And you do not know exactly what it is. And in theory, there are two major hypotheses. So these are all field data you see with the deadwood amount. The diversity of deadwood increases, but also the number of threatened species of beetles. But is it the more individual hypothesis, which means more amount, more surface, more individuals, and therefore more species? Or is it the habitat heterogeneity hypothesis, which means if you have more, then you have a higher diversity? This is a plot from an Iran old growth forest in beach. You see a huge amount when this 20 cubic meter tree falls down, and so on. Again, with data or designs created by God, you cannot investigate that because you have everything together. So we decided to run an experiment. This is from a brewery, the Lorry. They brought us the silver fir trunks and the branches of silver fir, and then we combined a resource availability axis and the habitat heterogeneity axis to disentangle both. I don't want to go in details, but the finding was that the diversity of deadwood is more important than the amount, which is a good message for managers which are keen to promote biodiversity in a production forest. It's not necessary to spend all your wood to the beetles. If you do it clever, different tree species, take care of different size of deadwood, sunny and shady condition, you can promote very easily the diversity. The question is then, this was a master student in our team. She investigated first time how many saproxylic species are there. We have lists of saproxylics, but these are just combined lists, and they do not take into account how much are there, how big is the sample coverage, and so on. And it does not take into account how many species use deadwood facultative. And what we had some stem eclectors, and we could extract and data from the whole plot. And there we used these nice methods by Enchao to estimate a proportion of obligate saproxylic beetles, saproxylic organism. You see in beetles is about 30%. Then there is a bunch of facultative ones, and almost roughly the half are not interested in deadwood. If we go to the opposite are the spiders. Spiders, there are a few spiders known using or living on deadwood, but you see that most of the spiders use deadwood facultative. It just means that deadwood is more than the habitat for obligate deadwood organism, even for many others using deadwood for a better life, even they can survive without. With all this creation, of course, this stimulates beyond deadwood to the spatial arrangement. You see here a typical core zone, dense forest here, standing deadwood here, lying deadwood here, so a big mixture, and this is a heterogeneity. And we spent quite a lot of effort using LiDAR data from airborne LiDAR to disentangle the different flavors of heterogeneity. And the most famous study on that is the groundbreaking seminal paper by Robert MacArthur. He did this foliage height diversity measure with a pole, pulling a pole through the canopy and counting the leaves who contact that. Today we can fly with an airplane over everything and have 50 shots per square meter, and then we have all the distribution. And he showed that the bird diversity increases across this foliage height diversity, interpreted as an increase in niche availability. The world here is a bit more complicated, and I would like to summarize. The first thing is he just looked on this vertical diversity or heterogeneity. But a forest has much more gradients of heterogeneity. We try to summarize that, inspired by Holger Kreft and his PhD student Stein. So we said, okay, environmental heterogeneity has an abiotic and a biotic component. This could be deadwood. Deadwood has a richness and a structure component. Then living vegetation has a diversity component by phylogeny, and then a structural component, vertical and horizontal heterogeneity. And then you have also the soil stuff heterogeneity. And all this creates heterogeneity. And of course, this makes the story not easier. These are all observational data. And this is how the results look like a bit like a mess. And to sum up the importance, we put together the findings here. And a very simple thing what you see is the major gradient affecting the groups, overall groups, is horizontal diversity. And this is exactly what the bark beetle is doing in our national park. He is changing horizontal heterogeneity dramatically. And this is a very powerful gradient of environmental heterogeneity. We looked in more details for the for the spiders. And if you look on the local community, everything starts with some regional processes, which has to do with dispersal. So a species must come from a regional species pool to your local community. Then you have some environmental filtering, creating the suitable habitat for some of the species. And then you have local processes like that you have some drivers like interspecific interactions, and so we created phylogeny, functional diversity, and study all the things which end up in the species richness. And you see all the curve, or these path analysis shows how important the different things are, and the main driver on this is a regional scale. It's a scale of 50 kilometers, so dispersal does not matter that much on this scale. Of course, maybe on hundreds kilometers it matters. The canopy cover is again the major driver. Even elevation is of subordinate role, and this drives the abundance and this drives the species richness. There is a bit about functional phylogenetic diversity, but many things are here. The species you observe somewhere is driven by canopy cover via the abundances. Again, these are observational data. This is a replicated study, so we do it twice in a different setting, coming to very similar results. But still, this is not really satisfying because this is all observational. So we decided, let's use the buffer zone and other sites in Germany to create these landscapes of heterogeneity by our own. This is how we do it. We top the trees. So the people said, now the bark beetle destroyed the national park and now the researchers destroy the beech forest. It's a bit true. And my colleague Klaus Bessler, we were then punished by the Ministry of Environment. Why are you doing so stupid thing? And he said, yeah, okay, no problem. We can bring back the tree crowns, but it's not cheap. So what we learned is you have to do the design, then there's the short, people are a bit shocked shortly, and then no one is interested anymore. Now we run a research unit funded by the DFG, which gave us the opportunity with 20 PIs to investigate this design for 4 + 4 years, which is amazing opportunity. And this is our design. So we have 9 different patches, and we always have one control patch, 50 by 50 meter, and then we always cut 28% of the DBH or the basal area, removing all the trees, keeping deadwood down, standing deadwood, and so on. And this is always with a gap, and this is always distributed so they are in the shade. This we have in this small landscape. Then we selected the same forest, homogeneous as a control, with the same number of patches. So we have always a pair of landscapes, heterogeneous and homogeneous. And this we replicated altogether 11 times from northern Germany, in Lübeck, to southwestern, to the Bavarian forest, and of course in the University Forest of Würzburg. And the second thing, so this was the first time that someone created a design for better diversity in a landscape. Of course, it's only a smaller landscape, but it's a real-world landscape. And the second thing which was unsolved is how to decompose multifunctionality. So we are interested how biodiversity and functionality interact in this biodiversity ecosystem function research. This is well done on the alpha scale level. There are a bunch of papers across Europe in mesocosm and so on, but it's not done on the beta diversity level. And of course we all are aware that beta matters, but this was unsolved. But again, with a great help by En Chao, roughly in one evening, she solved the problem, and it's so beautiful again. And so we created this new package called MF Beta 4, how to decompose functionality, which is not so easy because you have not units like species and individuals. That's the main challenge. And there now we are investigating the whole trophic cascade from autotrophs, different levels, including the decomposers from below ground up to the canopy, and a bunch of 20 different functions to see how these things interact. We still are in the process. The PhD students are finishing their group papers mostly, and then we will end up with some synthesis. When you are a manager, then often people ask you, where should I start my action? And this is exactly how, when I did all this deadwood research, we were always planning how to improve the production forest. And the first question is, where should we put the deadwood? Should we put them between existing reserves? Should we put them somewhere where you are active, so more easily? So is the spatial arrangement relevant? And this is Lenore Farik. She inspired the field of landscape ecology now since more than 20 years, I would say, or 30 years. And she brought very interesting ideas in that, and this is called her habitat amount hypothesis. So her idea is, or the problem is, if you start you have, let's say you have a forested landscape, all is forest. And now you cut down the forest and make arable fields. The habitat amount in the landscape decreases, but also the distance of your focal patch to the next patch is increasing. So there's some pure isolation and some habitat amount. And for a manager, it's very relevant to distinguish both things, because if isolation is relevant, then you have to take care of the spatial arrangement, which means you need a lot of effort bringing your deadwood with the lorry somewhere at the right place. If it's just about amount in the landscape, you can do it wherever you want. For a forest company, this difference can be per year 400,000 euro difference. So it matters. And we started with a with a review together with Ati Komonen on fungi and saproxylic insects, investigating at which scale studies show isolation or dispersal limitation. And you see different scales, very local, below 50 meter, stand level, up to 1,000 meter, up to 10 kilometer, 500 kilometer, more than 500. You see for the fungi, the data which we have are almost, there is nothing on this scale. There's a little bit, and then on the larger scale, but even fungi can tackle that. And you see for the beetles, there's very little up to this scale, and then it's relevant. And this is exactly what we see. So for the beetles in general, let's say 10 kilometers matters. For fungi, we talk about 1,000 kilometers. But then we tested these both hypotheses with our design. So we had the amount in the local landscape. These were the number of dead trees and the patch size, which was our artificially arranged deadwood. So we had deadwood arranged as I have shown before, and this is by national park design. So nature is creating dead trees in a different amount. They were all identified by LIDAR techniques and so on. Doesn't matter. And at the end, we could show by the interaction of these slopes that our data show clear support for the habitat amount hypothesis and not for the habitat patch hypothesis. So in simple word, it's about the amount and not the spatial arrangement. When you have all these dead trees then in your national park, I have shown that you can use them for these nice connectivity studies. But the next question is, how about the carbon cycle? Now the trees are all dead and this is bad for the climate and so on. And we were really interested to get a better understanding what is the contribution from deadwood to the global carbon cycle. And you are all aware of these climate scenarios and all about the global carbon cycle is important for all the prediction for our future and so on. And there were several things had to be solved. The one thing was that people during the last, let's say, 15 years, we increased the knowledge about tree growth. So we have a fair understanding of the global tree growth on a macro scale. The next step was we need a better understanding of tree mortality on a global scale. It's also now solved. And the last thing was, how about the recycling of the trees? And this was missing. So all the models used a very coarse black and white assumption. So we set up more than 50 plots in all forests of the world, all these nice dots. In the different environments, we excluded insects. We allowed them access. We waited. And with Peter Baldrian, we currently analyze the fungi. But also we measured the influence of insects on the decomposition and estimated in total the carbon contribution globally. And these are the results. You see the main axis is precipitation and temperature, and as we discussed at the beer earlier, we have quite a nice orthogonal picture. It's not perfect, so there are some lags. So there is basically no forest. So there are some limitations in the habitat. We went to the extremes, and you see here, the more blue it is, the lower is the decomposition rate. So when we go to the first thing, so the fastest decomposition is in something like lowland Ecuador, high precipitation, high temperature, the best for high speed. You can feel that if you hike in this tropical forest, you rot during hiking. So all your clothes are rotting, and even a huge tree, a dead tree, vanished after 9 years. And if you go to Shumava, it takes decades, even in my national park. And this is basically the result. And then we use these functions to model the global carbon cycle. And this is, let's go to the gray scale. This is the total contribution from deadwood. And you see, when we discuss about deadwood and climate in our temperate zone, it's irrelevant. People do not like to hear that because, even what you do in your garden is relevant. Yes, it might be, but not on the global cycle. So why are the tropics so relevant or overwhelming in the contribution? And there are two very simple reasons. It's very simple ecology. The first thing, you need a mound. So you need huge amount of forest to have trees and dead wood. And you have two areas where you have huge amount of forest. These are the boreal forest and the tropics. And the second thing is you need speed, a high decomposition rate, a fast process. And this is missing in the boreal zone, where the trees are there for 70 years, 60 years. But it's very quick here in the tropics. And you see even the contribution of the insect is highest here. So, in simple words, if someone asks you about climate and deadwood or non-deadwood in the Shumava, forget it. Okay, with that I come to my conclusion. So insect population seems to be largely affected by weather and weather anomalies. They are affecting even uncontrolled biodiversity measures. The bark beetle dieback increases diversity of many taxa, so in principle they are good for the biodiversity of the Shumava mountain. Deadwood is an important feature for temperate forests, not only for subroxilic species, but the temperate contribution to the global carbon cycle from deadwood is really low. Canopy variation is even more important for forest biodiversity and community assembly. And this is something which has been homogenized by humans for 200 years via modern forestry. And now we see this change by disturbance events. Even if people are stressed by that, for their management, which I fully understand, it's increasing the variation of the habitats. Salvage logging negatively affects deadwood taxa and changes also the community processes. So it's very common in your Shumava National Park. It's also common in some areas of our national park. Still, if you tell this, the politician at the moment, they kill me. Deadwood and disturbance management can be improved in protected areas and in production forests, so we should not distinguish between both. So they both are ends of a gradient, but there are many options, and particularly we see that at the moment, I did not talk about that, in our oak mixed forests, we see an amazing increase of the population of the rarest subroxilic insects at the moment. So during the last 3 years, species which were recorded from Bavaria twice during the last 50 years, we have now several recordings every year. Species which were really rare, we collect them in thousands now. So this mortality of the trees, which happens, the stressors on the trees, is good for many organisms in the forests, because they lack the old trees, they lack the dead trees and so on. And beta diverse is still an unexplored field in forest ecology, maybe also beyond, because it's hard to manipulate, and I would like to stimulate all ecologists to do more, to share more real-world experiments. I think there are experiments out there, but often not under the supervision of ecologists, and therefore then afterwards hard to analyze. With this, I would like to thank for your attention, and I hope I could give you some stimulations, even to think about your own point of view. Thank you for inviting me.